Chapter 129. Shizun, do you like what you see? In that split second, chaos swam in Wanning's head like the churning of the seas, the lashing of torrential rains, the booming of thunder, the flashing of lightning, the darkening of clouds. To take them off or to keep them on? A most dire question. Keeping them on seemed inappropriate, now that he knew he had put on the wrong clothes. And it wasn't like he could pretend he hadn't heard what Moran said. Taking them off? He couldn't possibly handle the embarrassment of taking off the clothes he had finally put on, piece by piece, with Moran right there. A few moments passed in an awkward silence. Moran said at last, "But I've washed those clothes quite thoroughly. They're very clean, so if Shizun doesn't mind, then please feel free to wear them." Moran let out a breath of relief. He'd always been a bit slow on the uptake. He hadn't realized until after he'd spoken that revealing the truth when Wanning was already mostly dressed would be nothing short of forcing his Shizun to strip in front of him. He was singed by the mere spark of that mental image, and his face burned redder. Luckily, he'd roamed far and wide these last couple of years, and was no longer so tender-skinned as he had been. The blush wasn't as noticeable on his cheeks, tanned the golden of wheat. But his heartbeats felt too loud by half, and his conscience heaved with fear and guilt that Wanning would hear. He hurriedly bowed his head and made to pick up Wanning's robes to clothe himself. After both were dressed, they looked at each other again, only to fall into a different kind of awkward silence. The clothes didn't fit. Wanning's robes were clearly too small for Moran. They didn't even overlap in the front, leaving exposed a large expanse of firm, honey-colored chest, and too short as well. The way half his legs were left uncovered, like he was flat broke, was admittedly a sorry look. Wanning fared no better. Moran's robes draped over him, covering him from neck to toe, and pooling on the ground to trail behind him like a wisp of white mist. It looked fine and proper, but it also made obvious how much shorter he was than Moran now. Wanning felt rather affronted. Face sullen, he said, "Leaving." Meaning, "I'm leaving." But Moran misunderstood and thought he was inviting him to leave together. Thus he nodded and picked up his Shizun's wooden washtub and change of clothes, earnestly following him. The two reached the entrance of the bath and lifted the curtain. Outside, away from the hot springs, it was considerably cooler, and Wanning shivered in the autumn chill despite himself. When Moran noticed, he asked, "Are you cold?" "No." But how could Moran not know by now that this was merely his pride speaking? He said with a smile, "Well, I'm a little cold," and lifted a hand in a practiced gesture. With a flourish, a scarlet glow sprang from his palm to form a cold-warding barrier around the pair of them. The barrier was beautiful, its radiance shimmering and flowing with a scatter of flower motifs at the top. Face unreadable, Wanning glanced up at it. "Not bad. You've improved." "I'm still nowhere near a match for Shizun." "You're not far off. My cold-warding barriers are probably no better than this." Wanning gazed at the barrier and, noticing the faint flowers, commented, "The peach blossoms are a nice touch." "They're high-tongue blossoms." Wanning's heart trembled, sending ripples refracting through the depths of his eyes. Moran continued, "5 petals." For a moment, Wanning was stunned, then couldn't help the puff of laughter that escaped as he tried instinctively to hide the quivering in his eyes with faint nonchalance. In a slightly mocking tone, he said, "Copying me now, are we?" But to his surprise, Moran only looked at him guilelessly and nodded in response. "It's a poor imitation, I'm afraid." Wanning was left rather speechless. They walked side by side in silence for a while before Wanning picked up his pace. He didn't want to be right next to him like this. Behind him, Moran suddenly asked, "Shizun, Are you mad I didn't make it back in time for the banquet? No. Really? Why would I bother lying? Then why are you walking so fast? Of course, Wanning wasn't going to say, because you're too tall. He was silent for a moment, then looked up at the sky and lied, because it looks like it's going to rain. As if he'd jinxed it, drops of rain presently started falling from the overcast sky, pitter-pattering into a curtain. Moran smiled. His smile was every bit as lovely as it had been 5 years ago, yet now more dazzling for its newfound sincerity. Wanning glared at him. What's with that stupid grin? Nothing. Moran's dimples were deep and sweet. The young man, tall and sturdy, returned his gaze with downcast lashes and a docile, obedient demeanor devoid of arrogance. He was even a little bashful as he said, I'm just really happy to see Shizun after so long. In silence, Wanning stared at him, at the dimples adorning his cheeks. He had once thought those twin pools of sweetness would ever belong to Shi Mengjing alone, but it turned out that wasn't so. To be allowed a jar of that sweetness himself, all he had to do was give up his life. Dummy. Wanning chided him. Moran let his long, soft lashes droop and grinned big and wide, exactly like a dummy. But as he got a little carried away in the moment, he accidentally trod on Wanning's hem, which he'd been so careful to avoid this whole time. Wanning, his expression stern, looked at the ground and then at Moran, but said nothing. Moran was very straightforward. The clothes are a little big on Shizun. He sure knew what not to say. Moran walked Wanning all the way back to the Red Lotus Pavilion. In all honesty, Wanning found it a rather strange experience. It was always his way to come and go alone. He'd rarely ever had the occasion to share an umbrella, be it of oil paper or magic. So, halfway there, he stopped and said, I can do it myself, it's just a barrier. Moran was a little taken aback. Wasn't it fine until now? So why? What kind of master makes their disciple hold the umbrella? There was a moment of silence. But Shizun has done so much for me, Moran said, his voice low and quiet. These last 5 years, I spent every single day hoping to become just a little bit better. Shizun is so capable and can do everything by himself. So I wanted to be able to do just a little more than Shizun. That way I could be of use to Shizun, repay Shizun. But even after all the training and studying I've done, I still feel no closer to that goal. I'm afraid I might never be able to repay Shizun's kindness. That's why. He bowed his head, hand unconsciously clenching into a fist at his side. The rainwater gathered in streaming rivulets on the ground, droplets splashing and rippling like blooming flowers. That's why I ask that, from now on, Shizun, let me take care of the little things, like holding the umbrella. Wanning said nothing, watching him quietly. I want to hold an umbrella over Shizun for as long as I live. As he listened silently, Wanning felt a burning in his chest. It was such a heartwarming thing to hear, yet he found himself wanting to cry. He was someone who had undergone so much suffering and braved it all, like a traveler who had walked for too long and had finally found shelter where they could lie down and rest. Even his bones felt like they might fall apart as he collapsed. For a lifetime. Moran was 22 this year. The saying went that time passed differently once someone passed 20. Before one was 20, a mere 3 or 5 years felt so long it could be called a lifetime. But past that, time would feel like a racing current, everything surging past in a rush with no return. Moran was saying he would step out of the racing current to hold an umbrella over him. Wanning had so rarely received kindness that this flood of tenderness felt like pain instead. He studied Moran, studied that person standing with his head bowed, and said, "Moran, look at me." Moran lifted his head. "Say that again." Moran gazed at him. His face was still somewhat alien to Wanning. It was different from the one in his memories, and different from the one in those absurd dreams he'd once had. This face was gentle, composed, and steadfast, bearing both the warmth of fire and the firmness of iron, as he met Wanning's eyes with neither hesitation nor avoidance. When Wanning had looked at Moran for the last time 5 years ago, he had yet been a growing boy. In a blink, he had grown into a handsome, confident man before him, a man who was dropping to one knee, looking up at him and saying, "Shizun, I want to hold an umbrella over you for as long as I live." Wanning stared at him in a daze, at those dark eyebrows and that shapely jawline, at those bright eyes and that straight nose. He had grown into an impressive pine tree, matching Wanning's height before overtaking him. One day, the tree that was Wanning, which had stood in the wind and rain for so long, woke up, blinked, and found that the rain had ceased, the clouds had dispersed, and in the soft light of the sun there was another tree standing beside him, even taller and steadier than he. When the wind rustled through its leaves, the sunlight filtered through like gold dust. This tree said he wanted to stand by his side for a lifetime, until they both fell over, branches bare and withered. But with every season that passed until then, he would never again be alone. As he stared, Wanning was struck with the realization that Moran was no longer the bloodied, unconscious disciple he had carried back from Butterfly Town 5 years ago. Standing there in the rain, under the haitang blossoms, dancing atop the barrier, he seemed to see Moran for the first time, studying him thoroughly and carefully, looking at this man who was promising him a lifetime. Wanning's heart began to race. He suddenly noticed how alluring Moran looked now, from the line of his nose to the shape of his lips, from the curve of his jaw to the jut of his throat. What he had felt for Moran before was only love, which could be kept hidden. But right now, this man felt like nothing short of a fire to him, a fire that could too easily set him ablaze, like he was mere kindling, sending flames soaring up to scorch the skies. Magma that had lain dormant all this time stirred awake and stretched its limbs in the abyss deep within himself, ready to burst in a violent eruption at any time. It threatened to burn through all the reservations, dignity, and restraint on which he had always prided himself, threatened to burn it all to ash until there was nothing left.